Tell me, what do you see in the mirror?
It is a cheap glass. I can barely make out anything at all.
Sometimes I wonder if what we can know of Adonai and the law is just as blurred. What if we're not seeing the whole picture? What if it's more beautiful and more strange than we can ever imagine?
That is the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. It might even be blasphemy.
It was just a thought.
And you will never utter those thoughts in public.
Amen.
This is part -4 of the 100-part movie, Jesus Verse, the Movie and Vision. This is one of the preludes to the upcoming movie parts. It prepares you and me for what Jesus is going to show us. This part is called Childlike and Childish. I'm a Jesus street preacher. That is my mission on earth. I try to do it well. Still, some people don't understand what Jesus is having me do in many instances. Sometimes the things that Jesus has me do look childish, goofy. Would it look childish to you, do you suppose, if Jesus told me to take off my clothes and preach for 3 years naked as a kind of living parable, a kind of performance art for the people in my hometown? My nakedness meant to provoke people, to wake them up towards repentance, towards them getting more Jesus, towards them getting ready for the end of days. Personally, I think it would be rather childish of me to strip down naked and preach in the name of God, unless God told me to. But before you or I judge too harshly, realize that there is a biblical precedent, and it's not a small precedent. Isaiah himself preached for 3 years buck naked. Jesus told him to. Let me read you this. This is the part where I start reading you something. Okay, let's see. I'm going to read you this thingy right here about nakedness. Naked prophet warns city of impending doom. In the spring of 1828, a middle-aged man known only as Harris appeared on Cumberland Street corners prophesying a terrible calamity to fall upon the people. William Loudermilk wrote in History of Cumberland, Maryland, At the time, Cumberland was a small town about the size that Lannaconing is today. Loudermilk described Harris as a Quaker of good physical proportions, quiet, except for when he was preaching, and humble. He lived near Leesburg, Virginia, so why he chose Cumberland as his place to preach is not known. Residents had seen street preachers before. The problem was they hadn't seen so much of a street preacher before. After sojourning for a while, he took his departure, but year after year he made his reappearance and began disrobing himself and parading in the street in a nude state, Loudermilk wrote. He may have been following in the footsteps of the prophet Isaiah, who warned the Egyptians and the Cushites of their impending doom. Isaiah 20, 2-4 reads, At the same time spake the Lord by Isaiah, the son of Amoz, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from off thy loins, and put off thy shoe from thy foot. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. And the Lord said, Like as my servant Isaiah hath walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians prisoners and the Ethiopians captive young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. The Egyptians and Cushites didn't listen to Isaiah, and Cumberlanders didn't listen to Harris. They were tolerant of him as he returned year after year, preaching the same message in the nude. However, when he showed up at one church, he crossed the line. As the congregation froze in shock, Harris walked down the center aisle. The congregation recovered before he reached the pulpit and threw him out of the church. He was arrested on that occasion and other times, but he never seemed to sit in jail for long. His propensity for walking the streets naked led to his chastisement on several occasions, and this infliction he bore without murmur, saying his mission was to suffer and to warn the people, Loudermilk wrote. The last time he preached a catastrophe coming to Cumberland was in 1833. At that point, the town had had enough. Harris was arrested and sentenced to be lashed on his back, which was carried out in front of a crowd of spectators. He told observers that it was his duty to suffer, even from those he was trying to warn of impending tragedy. Impressed by his stoicism, the people of Cumberland agreed to give Harris the opportunity. They agreed to give Harris the opportunity to disrobe and complete his walk in the hope that he might then consider his mission accomplished. With all the citizens forewarned and inside their homes, Harris strolled in splendid isolation, shouting at the top of his lungs that fire and brimstone would soon devastate the wicked city. After his walk, he donned his clothing, and quieted down. David Dean wrote in Allegheny, "This happened about 1 week before the Great Cumberland Fire, which destroyed a third of the town. After the fire, many residents noted that the fire had followed the same path through the town that Harris had walked." So was Harris a prophet, or like the proverbial broken clock that shows the correct time twice a day? Now, in the upcoming movies, Jesus is not going to make me get naked. At least I don't think so. However, I will admit, and Jesus wants me to emphasize, that the big 100-part movie that you're watching a part of right now will certainly have some childish things in it by design. Jesus is making this movie, and I am helping, and Jesus had me put a number of childish things in it. You'll see. Meaning you're about to see things that are considered, even by me, even by Greg, immature, flat out childish, yet you do them. And you could say that this movie is like the opposite of an R-rated movie, which is for mature audiences only. What you are about to watch is probably only comfortable for audiences that are childlike and can handle some childish behavior, childlike behavior and concepts and parables without rejecting them outright because they are immature, childish. Try. Can you handle that without rejecting it? Some people can, some people can't. That's fine. Do whatever Jesus tells you to do. But know this, I am called to be childish in a childlike way. Not everybody's called to this kind of mission. In fact, few are. But Jesus has called me to it, and I've seen some other people who he's called to it as well. In fact, I'm friends with some of these people. Now, a person I love very much, when I announced to her that Jesus had called me to not only be childlike, but also be downright childish, she cautioned, "The Apostle Paul said, Greg, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things." 1 Corinthians 13:11. Jesus immediately filled my mouth with a truth. It felt like my mouth was being possessed by Jesus in that instance. And Jesus had me answer her straight away. I said something like, "The Apostle Paul was speaking of the unholy kind of childishness, not the childlike childness," I replied. I went on to explain the negative kind of childishness that the Apostle Paul was speaking of, that he would put away when he became like a man. And of course, that is the sinful kind of childish, the opposite of what he had just spoken of in 1 Corinthians 13. For example, love is patient, and it is childish to be impatient. Put that away. You can't find patience for these kind of movies? Put that away if Jesus tells you to. Love is kind. And what? It is childish to be mean, the opposite of kind. Love does not envy. It is childish to envy. Love or charity is not proud. It is childish, therefore, to be prideful. Charity does not boast. It is childish to boast. Love does not dishonor others. It is childish to dishonor others. Love does not seek its own reward, or is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. Well, it's childish to be easily angered or to be self-seeking. Love keeps no record of wrongs. In other words, charity keeps no record of wrongs. It is childish to keep records of wrongs of others that others have done to you. Love does not delight in evil. Therefore, it is childish to enjoy sin and other evil. Put away those things once you become a man. But love rejoices in truth. Therefore, it is childish not to rejoice in truth. Love protects. Therefore, it's childish not to protect. Love trusts. Therefore, it's childish not to trust. Love hopes. Therefore, it's childish not to always hope. Love perseveres. Therefore, it's childish not to persevere, etc. Go read 1 Corinthians 13 and turn it on your head, and then you'll understand the kind of childishness that Paul was objecting to and that should be put away when you become a man or a woman, a grown. And then to emphasize that there is a good childlike childishness, a good childlike childishness. Jesus had me remind her what supposedly mature people in our society are watching each night. Is that childish? It's a bad kind of childish. Watch the mainstream TV, and you can see what childish in a negative sense looks like. Those are the kind of things that Paul objects to most strenuously. And the mature people in politics, think about what they look like, the full-grown, mature politicians. How do they act? Is there childishness afoot? Or is there childishness being expressed in like how they're treating one another? What do you think? I know what Jesus thinks. And talking about naked prophets, what did Isaiah prophesy of our day? About mature women who would do what? Mince as they walk and tinkle and so forth. He was portraying what would be pretentious behavior, prideful behavior, what one could call childishness, using the term childishness in a pejorative sense. But that's not the only way it can be used. Because when we think about God's prophets, we usually think of staid, S-T-A-I-D, somber, sedate, placid. But Jesus likewise has prophets who are the opposite of those words. In other words, so that righteousness can be brought to pass, he has childish in the good sense, childlike childishness. Consider also that one of the most frequently used put downs by devilish people, as prophesied by prophets and actually as experienced by prophets, is to claim that some people are being foolish, childish, immature for instance, worshiping a God that is invisible, for praying, for instance, as a solution to social problems, etc. Just keep an eye on what the world thinks childish things are. Bottom line, get used to different. Get used to childlike childishness on occasion in the upcoming movies. So this is like an additional disclaimer. It's like you're going to see some childish things. I would advise, and Jesus would advise you, to not easily dismiss those things just because you see something that looks to you like immature. So you've been warned. Just because you see somebody, even a religious person, go around naked, listen to what they're saying. They might be quite childish, or maybe they won't be actually naked, but they'll be metaphorically naked. In other words, doing something that's immature. Why are you trying to do that? Why are you doing it that way? That looks foolish. That looks immature. These people who are godly people don't do it that way. So how can this be right? Well, if you're basing it on whether it's childishness, be careful, because God has done this before and he is doing it again. He will bring people who speak a different kind of parable, a childlike childishness, and he will embed his message there, just like we saw Harris did. God had Harris go walk the streets. I believe it. Is it true? I don't know. I believe it.